William Metpi Buna-Gona. A biography written by Riley Kahneman. William Metpi Buna-Gona was born in 1920 in his patrilineal village of Horen on Manus Island in the days of the early establishment of the Catholic mission in Papatali around the year 1913, followed by the establishment of Liebenzell mission by German missionary Reverend Dopke of the Evangelical Church, 1914. The Seventh-day Adventist was established when Metpi was 12, and Lorengau Airstrip, now Momet T International Airport, was first opened when Metpi was only 19. Metpi had 4 siblings, of whom 2 were his sisters and 1 other brother. His maternal villages were Bowat and Sapon villages in the hinterland of Manus Island, now in Tetedu local level government constituency in Manus. The birth and naming of late William Metpi also resonates with the brief history of World War I. As war broke out between Germany and Britain in Europe in 1914, a small detachment of Australian troops visited Manus and relieved the German administration. No shots were fired during that arrangement. After the war, Manus continued under Australian colonial administration until 1921, when William was also born. Following the annexation of Manus with the northeast of New Guinea by the early Germans and German missionaries of the Evangelical Church, William had the opportunity to attend the first mission school and had a formal education during his time. There was little disruption, although World War II came to Manus at the end of December 1941 while William was still in Manus. Having completed some formal education paved the way for William to seek a job as a laborer in Rabaul in 1942. However, accounts from his son Simon Buna-Gona revealed some interesting findings of his early days after mission school, and a reason he had to find a job in Rabaul.
Metpi wasn't my father's surname. His real name then was William Buna-Gona. He got the name Metpi from an American warship anchored at Seedler Harbor during the 1942 Admiralty Island battle. Every time he would come by, his sisters would ask him where he was going. His usual answer would be that he was visiting or going on board the American vessel Metpi, known to locals, to tell stories with the soldiers, eat with them, and get cigarettes from the ship crew. This became William's usual routine, and his family started calling him in their local dialect, Po Metpi, Penkurti language, meaning man of the ship Metpi. This got accepted by him as time went on.
In 1942, late William Metpi had completed basic education and had proven his manhood ability in their traditional belief and norms. As a tradition, his family had to arrange for his future spouse-in-waiting. William disputed the arranged marriage and took off to Rabaul to look for a job. Fortunate enough and perhaps with his envy for warships, he got a job as a laborer on board a government surveyor, a chancy in Rabaul on February 7, 1942. It was also the first year Japanese forces landed on Manus and the Admiralty Islands and dropped the first bomb on Lorengau. With stern eagerness to work on ships despite having come from the Wuziai group of people from the hinterland of Manus, his passion and liking for ships didn't stop the man from the hinterland of Manus from joining ship crew and hand on deck. This was his dream of a seaman come true, his plans of leaving home for a new life were starting to come together. Little did he know what calling would come next, and his love for ships would lead him into a different career. As the Japanese imperial forces infiltrated Rabaul in 1942, William found himself in a war that wasn't his. He found himself yet in the midst of the Japanese forces' invasion efforts when he was captured with 1,200 other New Guinea workers as part of their invasion force to Buna, in Papandetta, at the tail of the famous Kokoda track. A young man from Manus journeyed beyond his own people. His traditional world order had arrived in another man's land. The land or the forest doesn't know his name, his scent, or language. Little did he know he had crossed New Guinea into the Papuan region at the foot of the mountain range that separated the territory of Papua from New Guinea. It dawned on him, he had to fight in the war, but he also had to choose sides in the Battle of World War II. Having judged the Japanese treatment of the native workers, the man from Manus plotted an escape plan with several workers behind Japanese line into Port Moresby just a few weeks after they arrive at Buna. The strategy, though, was to stay away from the no-mercy barrels of the Japanese guns, stay alive, and negotiate intelligence information with the Australian soldiers. They survived the escape behind enemy lines alive. The escape if caught by the Japanese imperial forces would be death penalty, as they had leaked intelligence of their position and strategy to the enemy forces. Metpi, being a strategic thinker, knew he had intelligence information that was detrimental to Japanese forces once it reached the Australian forces in Port Moresby. As anticipated, William led his men across the Kokoda Trail into Port Moresby, where he gathered intelligence and joined a small group of Australian guerrilla force as jungle soldiers. He was grafted into the 1st Papuan Infantry as a native soldier who fought alongside the Australian forces in the Buna-Gona Campaign, along tracks leading to the base of the Kokoda Trail banned Kokoda Track in Oro Province. The year was 1942. The 1st Papuan Battalion had defeated the Japanese forces in the Buna-Gona Campaign with ease. The good news has reached headquarters in Port Moresby, as Japanese force also lowered white and red flag, signaling defeat of the Buna-Gona battle, retreating to Sanananda for reinforcement there. While soldiers back in Port Moresby celebrated the first victory, the Japanese having learnt their lesson and formed a formidable barrier to meet the Australian and American forces, barrel to barrel with twofold reinforcement. Jolted by the victory, William and his team walked right into the firing squad of the Japanese forces at Sanananda, only to retreat and call for reinforcement from Port Moresby. This was worrisome, they had just drank over easy victory. The combination of Australian and American troops couldn't hold the fort longer. The fighting was most fierce and costly. It took several attempts by the 16th Australian Brigade, 126th American Regiment and 30th Brigade with extra reinforcement from Port Moresby, to finally invade the Japanese stronghold, forcing them to withdraw. Metpi survived the second campaign, which saw 2,100 casualties from his comrades in the Allied forces and 1,500 Japanese soldiers with at least 100 men killed in action. The battle had spread spontaneously across New Guinea as Metpi and his team crossed the Kokoda Track into the New Guinea side of the dense, hostile landscape and forest, swamped with leeches, stinging insects and mosquito. Here you have Metpi and other local carriers wearing only their native soldier dress, the Rami, lap, supported by Australian Army web belt. His supply of tobacco kept him warm, perhaps it was all the native could bargain for the carrier job for the Allied forces. Metpi, having received some form of education, knew what wars are meant for, given the German missionaries could have taught about the German wars. His favorite pastime of visiting American forces at the Siedler Haber in Manus made him a strong supporter of the Allied forces. Perhaps, this proved his loyalty in the Buna-Gona Campaign as well as the fierce Sanananda Campaign. Getting used to the war and proving his fierce fighting spirit, Metpi was dispatched as local native intelligence specialist and gunman to Salamua in what was called the Salamua Campaign with the New Guinea Battalion. Doing what he was good at, Metpi was able to gather intelligence from locals on the whereabout and stronghold of the Japanese imperial forces from the locals. The experience of Sananda had stepped up the Allied forces' combat strategy. This time Metpi among the Allied forces' frontliners deployed a different approach by using diversion strategy, targeting the old mission station and airstrip by the early Lutheran missionaries, now used as Japanese airfield. The battle was now in Moro Province, in what was called the Huon Peninsula Campaign in New Guinea. The Salamua strategy gained grounds for the Allied forces in 1943 when Japanese forces called for reinforcement from La, leaving behind at least 2,000 of their forces in La. On September 6, the Allied forces mobilized reinforcement in La, overpowered the remaining Japanese forces and took over La. The year 1944 from Scratch Records in the Pacific Studies, Volume 9 of November of 1985 described Metpi's outstanding bravery in the Huon Peninsula Campaign in Finschhafen where Metpi claimed a total of 110 enemy soldiers killed in action, Kia. However, other reports in the Australia War Memorial reported Metpi's bravery killed to 116. By then Metpi had been deployed to battles in the Sepik, Madong, Alexisafan battle in Madong as a war hero in the making. Nearing the year 1945 and as the war began to quell, Metpi, being the most outstanding native soldier of his time, could not resist the conscientious among his fellow native soldiers on fair compensation and perhaps recognition for their role and contributions in the relentless Battle of Papua and New Guinea campaigns. They went through the shadow of death, saw death the same as their counterparts from the Australian forces, yet the inequality of pay condition between the Australian forces and natives serving the infantry really bad. Native forces were only issued the Rami, lap, with Australian Army spider belt and a batch of their ranks worn on their arms. As the concern started spreading among the native soldiers, it provoked a fight at the New Guinea Island Battalion headquarters on February 6 of 1945. Metpi, being a masterminder, had some influence in the protest, requesting that New Guinea troops wear their rank on their laps rather than on their arms. Of course, it wasn't a violent protest, and Metpi yet again proved his influence as a talented but skilled military influence. Concluding his tour with 6 military campaigns in Papua New Guinea, Metpi ended up back in Rabaul, where was initially captured by the Japanese Imperial Forces to Buna-Gona in 1945. William Metpi, an unsung hero who had made it through the war as referred to him by most war history, left the army as Warrant Officer Metpi, the highest rank allowed to him within the system at that time. By 1945, the Japanese Imperial Forces were already defeated in the several campaigns in New Guinea. Much of the territory were retained under Australian colonial government. It was back in Rabaul when Metpi met one of his own Manusian, Polyo Malode, now late Sir Polyo Malode, who was serving as a policeman in Rabaul that time. Sharing similar charismatic leadership and foresight, they returned to Manus and sought to bring a new world order into being. The idea was challenged by early missionaries as cargo cult when Polyo movement began in 1946 as first attempt to form a local government system. At the backdrop of the movement spreading like wildfire across Manus, Metpi, being a supporter of Polyo, was pushing for establishment of school, resulting in the first government school establishment at Lundret in the hinterland of Manus in 1948. Along the coastal and atolls of Manus, the Polyo movement had led to the establishment of the first Baluan Native Local Government Council in 1951, perhaps the first local government system in Papua and New Guinea at that time, prior to any form of government decentralization. Pacific Studies Volume 9 of September 1985 stated that when Polyo movement began in Manus, Metpi was Polyo's one troublemaker, as seen by early colonizers, as they demonstrated a new era of native warriors who have had shared journey, triumphs and dreams for tomorrow. In 1954, Warrant Officer William Metpi was part of the delegation that travelled overseas for the first time to Cairns in Australia to meet the Queen as head of state of the Commonwealth during her tour to Australia for their awards. He was among 3 native Papua New Guinean service men who received Distinguished Medal for Military in recognition of his service in the World War II. According to account from Metpi's son Simon Ponagun, Metpi after retirement married to North Solomon, now autonomous region of Bougainville. However, he never had children of his own with his wife. He adopted his siblings' children Simon and Peter Ponagun as his next of kin. Prior to his passing, late William Metpi gave a brief account of his unsung hero encounter to Kaka Kais, late, who wrote his brief in the Pacific Studies Volume 9 of November 1985. Mr. Kais wrote Metpi's account that he was awarded Distinguished Service in Military, DSM, at a final parade in 1946. The accumulated war experience had made him a different man he was when he first signed contract as a laborer. William Metpi passed on somewhere prior to PNG's independence and is left behind by grandchildren from his siblings. He was humbly laid to rest at Lundret, where he initiated the first government school in Manus. The school now carries on his legacy as William Metpi Memorial Primary School. A naming that was proposed by late James Pakasowi, a former diplomat and teacher. In my interview with the late hero's son, he said the following words his father, late Warrant Officer William Metpi DCM, said. "I fought the war for Papua New Guinea, not just for my family and Manus. If there is any future recognition of any sort, it should be for the good of people I fought the war for." The final words were purely engraved in wisdom, patriotism and servanthood leadership. Lest we forget a great war hero of World War II, one of our son who was the beacon of the hope, the peace and freedom we now enjoy as an independent Papua New Guinea.
Of stories untold, a nation's heart growing bold. We gather here with hearts in fear. Papua New Guinea, 50 years here. The future's unclear, the silence loud. Will our voices pierce this shrouded crowd? They change the laws, they close the doors, but we can't ignore what's in store. Rise, Papua New Guinea, don't look away. 50 years, but where do we stay? We are the voices, yet we're ignored. Will our country fall or be restored? No confidence, they play the game. Corruption's touch, it's all the same. We fight for justice, we fight for light, but will we survive this endless fight? The weight of change, the fear of loss, can we rise above the cost? Rise, Papua New Guinea, don't look away. 50 years, but where do we stay? We are the voices, yet we're ignored. Will our country fall or be restored? Shut us down, but we won't let our country drown.